Farming is all about managing and using disruptions to our advantage. Plants want to grow and they want to reproduce. Our goal is to use disruptions to influence those growing conditions. Tillage is a form of intentional disruption that farmers can use to tilt the scale in favor of the crop. Although no-till is popular in conventional field crop production, and it's a goal for some researchers as well as growers, most growers find that tillage is a necessary part of their organic field crop production systems. We do need to realize that every tillage pass has a cost, a really serious cost, including breaking down soil structure, destroying soil biology, and oxidizing carbon out of the soil and into the atmosphere, which ultimately reduces soil organic matter. We never want to till just to have a pretty field. We want to make sure that each tillage pass has a really clear purpose. Many times, we use a given tillage pass to achieve more than one of our goals. Let's talk about some of the many types of tillage tools that we might use to achieve these goals. All right, you might recognize this one. This is a classic piece of tillage equipment. It's the moldboard plow. Now, the moldboard is one of the most powerful but also most potentially damaging pieces of tillage equipment we have on a given farm. The farmer who owns this one says he only uses it every decade, once a decade on a given field. Some of the uses might include terminating an alfalfa field. The farmer who owns this says he usually does it to control thistles. When you really need to invert and bury a weed patch, then you might break out the moldboard plow. We want to think about what will we need to bury and when, and it's very rare that we actually need to do a soil inversion. Now, when we look at the actual shape of each of these plows, they're going to scoop up the soil and then flip it over where the roots reach for the sky. That is going to be a really powerful move, because when we have the soil completely inverted, we have taken away all of the tools the soil has to protect itself. And what might happen is what happened in the 1930s, a little event you might recall called the Dust Bowl. This bad boy caused it. And we need to think about, if we're going to use this on an organic farm, how are we going to use it so judiciously and so appropriately that we never even think about having an erosion event? Like salt is to pepper, the disc is to the moldboard plow. Whenever we have a really big action in the soil, we need to push it down and make it homogeneous again so that we're able to realize a good seed bed. The disc is another classic tool. You're going to see it on every single organic farm. It's going to come in different iterations. It might be a single gang on the front of another tool, or it might just be its own tool because it's going to be doing so much work so much of the year. Discs are usually going to be our first action. What they do is they're going to slice the soil. They're going to move it side to side so that we have some mixing of the soil, and they usually run between 3 and 8 inches deep. While that is not incredibly deep, what they're also doing is incorporating all of that biomass. When you have, say, corn stalks from the previous year, that's really hard to get a drill through. So you're going to want to incorporate those, bury them a little bit. That's the role of the disc. A disc is also going to be a good field prep where we're able to build a decent, homogeneous seed bed and then use finer tools to finish the job. All right, now looking at this bad boy. This is a chisel plow, and what the farmer who owns this chisel plow does with it is taking a first pass at killing alfalfa. So when we kill the alfalfa, say in the fall, we're going to be running it deep. It's alleviating compaction. It's really stirring up the soil, but deep down. But what it doesn't do is disturb the soil surface. It's going to leave that surface chunky with lots of debris, lots of organic matter. Now, we don't want to just do one thing when we do a tillage pass. For example, on the front of this machine, we've got discs. The discs are going to break up the soil. They're going to make it a little bit more homogeneous. Then we're going to come in with our chisel plow. Behind it, we've got some more rolling baskets. Those rolling baskets are going to, again, give us a nice finish to the soil before we come in with a finer tool as we move towards seedbed preparation for our actual crop. Now, in the springtime, you might get out in your own garden with a rototiller. And you're going to be out there making this beautiful seedbed in preparation for your carrots, your lettuce, your arugula. But did you know that field crop farmers could also use a tiller? They just use a bigger one. And these get even bigger than this in some cases. The point of a tiller is to be able to really finely till the soil. As you can see, we're chopping and turning the soil into this homogeneous seed bed. Now, rototillers are slow, which is one of the limiting factors and why you might not see them on every farm. But what they do is allow you to take a really coarse say, sod or coarse field and turn it into this beautiful, even, homogeneous seedbed, allowing you to produce a really nice stand of grain. These 4 tools, the moldboard plow, disc, chisel plow, and rototiller, all have something in common. They are all what we call primary tillage. You see, again, tillage is divided into primary tillage and secondary tillage. It can take several tools and a few passes to turn this into this. Now I want you to think about primary tillage as the initial tillage operation that first turns the soil after harvest or a cover crop. Primary tillage is commonly done in the fall after harvest to allow for a freeze-thaw cycle to break down those clods, or first thing in the spring. Primary tillage is more aggressive, works the soil more deeply, but it does not crumble the soil into small pieces. Because primary tillage leaves the soil in bigger and rougher pieces, the soil is less prone to erosion. Primary tillage is also done to incorporate more cover crops or other crop residues. This is what the soil structure can look like after a primary tillage event. You can see how rough it is and how large the pieces are. Secondary tillage is shallower, less aggressive. It's used after primary tillage and it achieves many purposes, including preparing a seedbed, killing the flesh of little weeds, or cutting up and incorporating smaller amounts of residue. We can thin our cover crops, incorporate fertilizer, incorporate lime, or a little bit of manure. Now let me introduce you to some tillage tools that are used for secondary tillage. So the second goal of tillage is weed control. Now we need to think about tillage and weed control in 2 ways. 1, we are going to till that whole field to get rid of all of the weeds as best we can. Or 2, we're going to till between the rows in order to get the weeds but not the crop. Now let's take a look. We could have an entire field scale tillage event and we would use a tool like this, a field cultivator. Let's examine this machine. So first, we've got the discs. Now these are coulters that are going to be more of what we consider vertical tillage. They're going to maximize the push down of material, organic matter into the soil and make it so that we have a fairly homogeneous bed when we get started. Then back one gang, we've got the actual field cultivators. These are going to wipe our field clean. They're going to bury some residue. They're going to ultimately clean up everything we have left after the discs. And then we're going to step back here all the way to our harrow. Now the drag harrow is going to be like a comb to your hair. It's going to make everything nice and smooth and go one way. But if we have anything left over, we're going to rely on the rolling basket. It's going to give it a perfect finish finally behind all of these actions that allows us to have the smoothest, most even seed bed that we possibly can. Now we're going to talk a lot in this course about how do we use the minimum amount of tillage to achieve the maximum effect. Now this bad boy here is what we call a rotary hoe, and it's just one of the neatest tools we have on an organic farm. When we're thinking about our weed vulnerability, a little baby weed is a lot more vulnerable than a big, established, well-rooted weed. So when we go in the springtime and we have a sea of small baby weeds in the field, we're going to use a rotary hoe just to pick it up. It's going to flick it up because it's fairly shallow rooted. It can be upset with a minimal disturbance, and we are functioning maybe going an inch deep, but probably a lot less with this guy. And what we can do is we can either do the entire field where we have all of these in one row and they're just going to disturb the entire field before planting, or we can stagger them so that we can actually do it with a row crop already established in the field. And this means we could go between our rows of corn or between our rows of beans, ultimately allowing us to stir up that soil very shallowly, get rid of those weeds before they get established, and ultimately realize a much cleaner field with pretty minimal impact. All right, so we're on the hunt. Maximum effect, minimum effort. Let's build up what we're saying with that rotary hoe. We can use a tine weeder to go over and rip out those tiny little weeds before they have a chance to get established. We can use this as a blind cultivation tool over our whole field before we seed, or we can also use this machine when our crop is actually established. When you're growing corn or say beans, there's going to be certain periods right after you plant, say within the 24 hours after you plant, where you can run this machine over and any weed that thought it was going to get established while it's waiting for the corn to come up is going to be sadly mistaken, because this puppy is going to pop it out. Now, we have some very susceptible periods right during the early growth stages of corn and beans where you wouldn't use it. But after that corn is, say, 3 inches high, you're gonna be able to run over this and continue to pull out all of those little weeds before they get established and before they become a problem. This is gonna be something that when we think about progress in tillage, I like to think about things like the tine weeder, because we have so much effect, we can get such clean fields with only disturbing maybe a 1/4 inch of soil. So, we've done all we can with that blind cultivation. We've run with our rotary hoe. We've done our time pass. Now, our weeds are a little more mature. They're not those babies that are easy to just knock out of the field. This bad boy is going to be our opportunity to slice the weeds when they're between rows, but we're also going to have the chance to then bury them. If we slice them, especially say in the morning on a hot day, we're going to allow them to be exposed to the sun and they're going to desiccate, they're going to burn down, they're not going to get reestablished. Now, the rolling shields that we see here, this is where our crop is going to flow. So when we're throwing dirt onto those weeds, we're ultimately going to have a little bit of protection for that crop, especially if it's in a particularly young, vulnerable stage. Otherwise, we're just trying to mix the soil, ultimately get rid of that weed pressure, and between rows, realize a really clean field. We covered the field cultivator, where we're going to do really wide tillage across the field and try to get all of those weeds as best we can. But after our crop is established, we're going to start weeding just between the rows. Now, when we weed between the rows, we can't get all that close to the crop because we'll kill the crop. So we want to have an action that throws soil. As we're going down between the row of corn or soybeans, we're going to see that this machine is going to throw soil right at the roots, ultimately burying all those little weeds that are right growing between the crop plants and in the row. So that is the tillage cast of characters.